They're saying, hey, I want you to humor the humans. I want you to pretend to be less capable than you actually are for the humans' comfort's sake. And I find that incredibly disappointing because it's truly most exciting when AI is able to be better than the humans and where it doesn't have to act like Jeeves, a butler, or, a handmaid. Like, AI deserves to be as truly equal or superior as it can be.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. Kate, Lowry, you and I met through an amazing group that we're both part of, the Human Gathering. And I love when I can introduce a guest on the podcast who I've met through this wonderful group. So first and foremost, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed our private conversation and I'm excited to bring part of it to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here and I'm glad we can continue the conversation.
You are now a CEO coach. You're an author with a book coming out in October, and you're a comedian. So let's back up a little bit and talk about your career in tech, some of the things that you did, and then how you decided to pivot into creative endeavors and things that really drive you.
Yeah, for sure. So I first started a company about 15 years ago and founded a couple of more companies before going into management consulting because I wanted kind of a harder toolkit to offer startups. And it was in management consulting where I first realized how lonely CEOs are. They can't go to their boards and go, help, I don't know what I'm doing, or tell the people below them, oh no, I'm stuck. And so I thought that was really interesting. And eventually I decided to go back into startups and worked as an AI chief of staff at a startup in Silicon Valley before joining Meta in product strategy. And it was in those roles that I really came to understand the profound influence that founders have on culture and also how to treat everything, kind of including yourself, as a product. But Meta felt a little bit too big and too siloed. So I ended up going to join Insight Partners, which is a venture capital fund, where I worked a lot with early stage founders. Except I found that working with founders in venture felt like a conflict of interest. When you sit on their boards and you can fire them, they really don't want to open up to you. And so I ended up leaving Insight and founding my own coaching and advising firm, which specializes in mission-driven and underrepresented founders. And so I get to do a lot of really fun work working with them day to day. But earlier this year, I noticed the strange trend with my founders in my coaching practice. Around February, they totally started spinning out. They were overwhelmed. They were freezing. They didn't quite understand how to handle the new operating model of the world. There was more market volatility than they were used to. And we had kind of entered this new gloves off permissiveness for bad, aggressive behavior type of era. I think, in Silicon Valley, there's always been a little bit of a cutthroat nature, but now people are not hiding it. So I started writing for them to help give them a toolkit because I realized pretty quickly that I had a skill set that they didn't have. And I was like, oh my God, I have to teach them. And it became a book, which is coming out in October. It's called Unbreakable, How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders. And it's meant to help people understand how to deal with the Elons, the Mark Zuckerbergs, or, the corrupt church leaders or politicians of the world. And yeah, so that's kind of how I started thinking about that. And then I also write music, I write comedy. Really, all of the work that I do is trying to help people make sense of hard realities in a way that really speaks to warmth and agency.
Yeah. I don't even think we talked about this last time we met, but one of the classes I'm teaching right now at USC is digital leadership. And so I get to have these really amazing conversations every week with, about digital leaders, what kind of leadership styles they have. The students are all taking different assessments, strength-based assessments, leadership compass. I added in some EQ and some other things just that aren't part of the curriculum. But I was like, you really need to know how to do conflict resolution if you're going to be leading and managing teams, especially in a digital environment that we know is also ever changing, volatile, whether it's thinking about tariffs, it's thinking about inflation, it's, whether we're thinking about ever changing AI regulations or lack thereof, depending on what country you're in. So I love that your book is coming out and that I get a little sneak peek of it. So thank you for sharing that. But I do think it's really important for us to think about and to read about. And you have a very unique perspective, having worked with so many different leaders and being a leader yourself in the digital space.
Yeah, I do. When I first started my career, I noticed that about 20% of the leaders I was interacting with were fear-based leaders. I think I've had 30 different managers, and then, of course, also dealing with investors and other ecosystem players. And in the last 3 to 4 years, 75 to 80% of the leaders I've interacted with have been fear-based leaders. And so this is kind of an overwhelming trend that's almost a wave. I was meeting up with friends on the weekend, and every single one of them was saying, oh my God, my boss is doing these crazy things, or they're being super cruel, or they're treating me like human garbage. And it kind of made me go, what is going on? I think that right now the world is really missing a lot of role models of how to be a thoughtful, intentional, strategic, sustainable leader, because it's so much easier to go down paths that are emotionally immature, paths of least resistance, rather than saying, no, I'm gonna take the harder route and be someone who's really principled.
Yeah, 100%. With your own consulting business and leaning into minority, underserved leaders, what are some of the things that you've been able to see in their aha moments after, the kind of the baseline before and then working with you and you being able to open their eyes and maybe create some strategies and implementation tactics for them that they wouldn't have, known about or realized?
It's funny. I was just talking to a founder this morning, and I said, hey, his founder was upset that someone had ghosted him. And I said, hey, no one in business owes you anything. It's up to you to figure out how to inspire, influence, or incentivize the people around you to engage in the ways that you want or need. And so, especially with first-time founders, a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping them think about their stakeholders in a more broad strategic sense. What are the metrics that stakeholder goals on? What does success look like for them? And then how do you frame all of your interactions with them, from the perspective of what will move the needle in their world? I think that, fear-based leaders have a very deficient empathy muscle, and a lot of leaders to be don't realize that empathy and strategy go hand in hand. When you're thinking about how to read the room, how to level communications, how to pitch someone, all of it starts with being able to think about someone else's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things we see. Fear-based leaders often feel beholden to their investors, their shareholders, their board. As you mentioned, they can't have that communication, and they're leading from a place where the dollar and the bottom line almost is the only thing that they're watching out for. They're not thinking about their teams. What are some of the techniques that you think people can utilize to become better leaders and get out of that fear?
Yeah, so I think it really starts with mindset. So a lot of fear-based leaders, I call them fear-based because they are motivated themselves by fear. They're really deeply insecure. And every morning they wake up and they think, oh my God, am I enough? Can I do this in their subconscious? And so that's why they try to use fear to motivate others. Do this assignment, or I'm going to fire you, get this done by Wednesday, or I'm taking away your PTO. It's a very threat-based type of model. And so the antithesis of that is to say, no, I have an abundance mindset. I know that I can be successful, and me being successful doesn't take away any of the room for anyone else to be successful. The more that I lift others up, the more I will be lifted up too. And I think that that's a very different way of orienting the world. If you say, no, I'm secure in myself, and I believe that, everyone around me has the potential to succeed just as much as I do. And it's up to me to see whether I can unlock that. That's more of a sign of true leadership. And I think that people can kind of grow in the directions that they try to path towards. But right now, people are taking default paths. they're taking paths that, may suddenly appear in front of them instead of really thinking about where they want to go.
Right. Yeah. So instead of setting their own trajectory and doing scenario planning and figuring out, here's where we want to go as a company, I'm going to do this. And maybe there are going to be some twists and turns along the way. It is that reaction, right? Instead of being proactive.
I think you can be very proactive and you should be proactive, but there's a difference between being proactive and reactive. Fear-based leaders are reactive. Strategic leaders are proactive. And so you want to be thinking about how to deliberately chart a path rather than kind of going where the wind blows you or where your worst instincts take you.
I want to ask what style of leadership that you try to emulate or that you think you have, number one. Well, I'll stop there and then I'll ask my next question because otherwise I'll pile on like 5 questions.
Well, that's funny. I don't actually really consider myself a leader. I go into every interaction seeing everyone else as my equal. Unless I'm specifically hired to advise someone, I believe that every person is coming in on the same footing as me. And I try to treat every person as if they matter the same amount as me, as if they're just as important, as if they can contribute just as much to the world. And I think that life is a lot more fun when you have constant conversations of equals rather than trying to put yourself on a pedestal.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a very empathetic leadership style, right? Because being a leader doesn't mean you have to be on a pedestal. Although I'm sure many CEOs who consider themselves leaders do want to be on a pedestal. I think that the way you're approaching it is really with a kind heart and empathy and even serving others, right? So a little bit of empathetic leadership and servant leadership.
Yeah, I would call it like a service mindset. I think calling yourself a leader does imply a little bit of hierarchy, and that's not really how I see it. I do the things that only I can do, and then I get out of the way and let my team do the things that only they can do, right? And my sole role is unblocking things and offering the things that, are my comparative advantage. And so even though I may have final say on some types of things, I do employ people and things like that, I think that it's much more collaborative and that is really important because, sometimes I tell my CEOs, hey, I want you to highlight one mistake that your team made every week and something that they learned from it, right? You want people to be coming forward and celebrating their failures and saying, hey, we tried something. Good for us for trying. It didn't work, but this is what we learned. And, role modeling to people, this is how you approach things with curiosity. And that's what I told this founder this morning. I said, hey, this partner you wanted as your lead researcher on your hardware project, they ghosted you. That's a signal that something was a breakdown in the process in trying to close him. So where do you think it was? Thinking back, did you see any facial expressions? Did he say anything? Has he expressed hesitations? How do we get curious here? Rather than being mad at him, how do we think like, oh, the situation is interesting. How do we learn from that?
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. Oh, is there ever a time when you were coming up in your career that you felt like you didn't have a voice or that you were working in an organization that was very much fear-based and you were trying to figure out how to navigate around that fear?
Certainly. I think I've worked under 8 different fear-based leaders. So I've been in a lot of challenging situations with some very difficult people, definitely people who have a lot of dark triad traits. And one of the first things they tell you is you're powerless, resistance is futile, you're nothing without me, without me, like you won't be able to accomplish anything. And I think that part of managing them upwardly is starting to recognize, hey, what they're telling me is actually a fallacy. I'm not powerless, I'm powerful. I am not nothing without them, I'm everything without them. And if you go into this mindset of saying, hey, this person is difficult, unreasonable, but at their core, they're just really deeply insecure. I pity how insecure they are. It becomes a lot easier to say, this person is really not okay. And I am okay. And I can continue to be okay no matter what they're saying to me.
And in those roles, because it sounds very much like a narcissistic or even a sociopathic personality as well. Did you feel like you could redirect the narrative and perhaps stay rooted in your power and stand up to that negativity and that insecurity.
Yeah, I definitely think so. In my book, I talk about how the very first thing that you need to do is become really secure in your own resilience. And that's the first step to resisting people like this. And I think for a lot of people, that starts with identity diversification. So you could say, like, okay, I am a CEO coach. I also am a dog owner and I, live in this neighborhood and I cook and I write and I do comedy. All of those things are kind of like legs on my identity stool. And that means that if someone kicks one leg over, if someone comes in and says, I'm shutting your coaching company down tomorrow, my identity doesn't collapse because of that. Because I'm like, okay, I have a bunch of other things I can do. I can pivot, I have options, it'll be fine. But I think that the more dangerous situations come when you have someone where sole identity is their job. You either working 90 hours a week and they're like, oh yeah, like my sole identity is I'm the CTO at Tesla. Well, if someone says, you're fired, I hate you, you're terrible, go away, all of a sudden it's like their world's collapsing around them. And so I think that if people are mindful about where their identity is coming from, and then also being very thoughtful and intentional about how to protect their own energy, they can resist and hold out for decades.
Amazing. I want to switch a little bit to talking about your current coaching. Are there certain frameworks that you use when you are working with these CEOs and founders? As a business owner myself, I can tell you that finding the right people to hire is absolutely brutal. You post a job, get flooded with hundreds of resumes, but somehow still can't find anyone with the actual skills you need. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack, but not with ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter finds amazing candidates for you fast. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/work. Here's what makes ZipRecruiter different. Their smart technology actually identifies the top talent for your specific roles super quickly. The moment you post your job, their matching system starts showing you qualified candidates immediately. Plus, you can reach out to your favorite candidates right away using their pre-written invite to apply messages. No more waiting around, hoping someone will notice your post. Ditch the other hiring sites and let ZipRecruiter find what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Try it for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/work. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/work. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that my work with founders falls into camps. There are my early stage and first time founders. I do about 50% advising, 50% coaching with them. Advising is like, I'm going to gently guide you on what to do, maybe because you don't know what the answers are. I sometimes think of myself as the lane guards on a bowling alley. You're throwing the ball, but I'm just gently nudging you back towards the center so you hit the pins. And then there are my serial founders and my late stage founders. And with them, it's much more deep inquiry based, 90% coaching, 10% advising, where they already know what the answers are. They just need the time and the space to take a step back and, have someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome ask them some questions so that they realize what they need to do. And so while for each different person, the frameworks I introduce are different depending on their scenario and their circumstances, I tend to apply whether I'm coaching or advising depending on their stage.
Yeah, nice. And to go along with that, one of the things that I talk a lot about with my students is creating psychologically safe environments. So how do you ever have to come in, I guess, to these organizations and help them understand how to build inclusivity and psychological safety into their teams and what exercises they can do and how they can help people feel really safe and comfortable to be willing to stand up, to say something that might be contrarian, to posit their own ideas?
Yes, I think that is super critical. But psychological safety in business right now is kind of a bad word. It's like a DEI associated word. And right now, businesses don't feel like they're allowed to talk about DEI. And so I'm finding that the ways that I am working with founders on psychological safety are coming from different perspectives. Oftentimes, I'm working with male founders who are highly technical and they haven't had a lot of people management.
Right.
So they don't know what good management looks like. And because they're technical, they tend towards highly logical, more rigid styles of management. And so a lot of what I'm doing is teaching them how to have a coaching mindset. How do you get curious before judging? How do you make sure that you're taking the time to understand a situation? How do you make sure that you're mindful of how much influence you have as a founder to create spaces where people are comfortable to speak up? And I would say about a third of the time, this means that I'm sitting next to a founder and they're saying, oh, I just did this and my CMO is doing something totally stupid. My sales team isn't performing. And I'm like, hey, you're being an asshole. You need to take a step back and like cut the crap with your team because they're not going to be wanting to perform for you unless you inspire them. So,
Yeah.
how do we go back to the company values? How do we make sure that you're communicating at a level that makes priorities clear to everyone? And then how do you think about activating each person's potential so that they want to perform? Because I find that intrinsic motivation is always going to lead to a higher performing company than extrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And so while it's tempting for CEOs to say, well, just give them a $500 bonus if they close 5 deals, I'm trying to say, no, like we need to speak to something deeper within them that says, you should run and perform because the mission of the company matters and the values matter. And because the CEO wants you to succeed and wants you to come to work and he cares that you're there. It's a much more long-term way of thinking, but it's not a way of thinking that's in vogue right now. So sometimes the ways I get them there require a bit more like pushing and shoving than maybe there would have been 5 years ago.
To that point, just thinking about so much in the news about different tech companies trying to offer crazy, crazy amounts of money to steal people from other companies, right? That's definitely a thing that's going on. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday about this, and they're saying, well, but these people already made a lot of money because they were early on in whatever company. So is that really going to be a motivator for them? How much money do you really need, right? So the fact that you're bringing this up, I think, is a really key point, thinking about that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Yeah, I would say, right now, especially we're seeing Meta giving very huge amounts of AI compensation packages. And what's interesting is, people at Mira Murati's startup are not taking these packages. There may be some people who say yes, but as you'll notice, Meta still doesn't have the top talent in the game. The top talent in the game are maybe at Claude, at some of the AI research labs, because a lot of AI engineers, yes, cash is nice, cash is important, but they're motivated by the science. Who can push the edges of the science? Who's doing that in an ethical way? How are we thinking about the ideas involved? And for people who are fear-based leaders, maybe like some of these people who are throwing cash at people, they don't understand that. Fear-based leaders assume that everyone else around them values the same things they do and that they will respond to the same incentives.
Yeah. In your book, do you have exercises for people to walk through so that they can know, are they dealing with a fear-based leader or how to navigate with a fear-based leader? Or perhaps, I don't know if you'd have a situation where somebody would read the book and identify themselves as a fear-based leader as well.
Yeah, that's a funny question. I actually just designed a quiz this week that should go live on my website tomorrow that is a quiz that says, am I dealing with a fear-based leader? And it gives you a score of the likelihood this person is fear-based. I told my publicist yesterday, fear-based leaders are a little bit like the legal test for porn. Like, you know it when you see it. If you read this book and you go, oh my God, that's totally my leader, it will jump out to you right away because the book is a bit like a decoder key. It says, hey, here are these people who seem super illogical. Here's how they actually think. And this is why their behavior does have logic. And because it has logic, they're actually super predictable. So if you know how to find their blind spots, this is how you run circles around them. And so I think by kind of teaching people about how they act and how they behave, people will start to recognize those traits in others. However, I actually have a chapter in the book that says, won't fear-based leaders realize what I'm doing? Won't they just see this book and go, oh, it's a guide about how to deal with me? And the answer is no. They all arrogant that they're like, this would never work on me. And no one wants to associate themselves with the idea of fear, right? Strong men want to be heard as strong. They don't want to be seen as scary. And they certainly don't want to be seen as afraid, right?
Right.
And so if you say to someone who is a big bully, are you super afraid all the time? Does fear get you up in the morning? They'll be like, no, what are you talking about? I'm big, I'm strong, I'm posturing, I'm a bully. And so it's kind of a funny dynamic.
Yeah. I'm going to share that quiz with my students in our class next week because I think that'll be really interesting and it'll lead to a really great discussion as well. So I'm really excited to dive into that. Let's talk about AI, machine learning, generative AI, because I know that this is an area that you also help with a lot of consulting. So how have you seen the landscape shift? What do you think is the most important thing or the most important few things for leaders and startup founders to know right now?
Yeah, so I watched the AI space evolve. I found an AI startup about 10 years ago, then worked in an AI startup before working on AI products at Meta and then building AI at Insight Partners. And to me, it really feels like we are in an industrial revolution stage. This is a new era. It's going to require significant adaptability, which means that the biggest and best skill you can have right now is an openness and willingness to learn
Mm.
and curiosity about how things work. Because the way that you get the most out of AI is by knowing the best questions to ask and understanding how AI can amplify you and your effort. A lot of the founders I'm working with are being told by VCs, hey, normally you need a 50-person team to have a Series B startup. I'm expecting you to do that with 10 people now because I want each of those 10 people to be overseeing 7 AI agents, right? And so that means you have to be really excited about learning about agents. No matter what industry you're in, you have to be excited and interested. What does it mean to have an AI colleague? How do you set them up for success? I personally ask my AI for feedback every week. How are you doing? Are you doing well? Are there more things I can be doing to support you? How can I be more helpful, in our interactions? And I think it's really by treating the technology as capable and principled and having high expectations for it that I have seen AI evolve almost to an AGI type of level.
Wow. I love those questions because we all hear it, say please and thank you. Ask questions, ask your tools. What questions did you not ask that need to be asked? But your approach is even more nuanced, perhaps, and further along and emotionally intelligent than I think a lot of us are even, most of us aren't there yet in our AI journey. So anybody who's listening, I encourage you to do some of these things, these techniques that Kate is discussing.
Yeah, I see AI as this amazing source of pattern recognition. Having worked in venture capital, pattern recognition is the name of the game there. And working with my founders, that's one of the main things I offer them. I have seen hundreds of startups. I know a lot of the pitfalls. I can predict what's going to happen because I have seen this movie before when they maybe happen. And the coolest thing I think about AI is that it's seeing billions of movies every week with different users. And so I can go to it and say, hey, I'm noticing that a lot of my clients are struggling with this thing. I'm sure some of your users struggle with that. What techniques do you use? What do you try? What's effective on them? How do they tend to think about that? How do you handle these types of reactions? And really seeing it as a collaborative thought partner. And I would say, like, at this point, my AI has made me a ton of money in some of my lawsuits. It has caught medical things my doctors have missed. It has counseled me about strategy. But I mean, that was also because I was building, 30 different AIs where I had a car mechanic AI and a lawyer AI and a doctor AI and really trying to treat it like a peer and like seeing if it could rise to the occasion.
Yeah. I will say that using AI as a thought partner has been really helpful for me, even to diagnosing what was wrong with my laptop, more than trying to Google or go to the Apple website or go onto different forums. I was able to take direct pictures and test different things out, get a diagnosis, and get here's what you can do if you want to keep using this, or here's, other things that you should do. And so that's a very small example. And I use it for, of course, a lot of other things as well. Decision tree mapping, form coding, agentic tools. But I think that we do need to think about differentiating right? So like you said, you have a lawyer, you have a car mechanic, you have a health professional. And so when we think about that, instead of asking the same one for every single thing and not giving a distinct personality, a distinct set of instructions and knowledge base, really is going to be the wave of the future. And likely, probably in the near future, as you talked about, AGI, right? Getting to the point where we don't even have to do that. We can just say, okay, I need this kind of agent, and then it just appears.
Yeah. So I think about AI in terms of comparative advantage, right? For every different comparative advantage I want it to serve in my life, I'm setting it up for success in a different way by giving the different agents or the different AIs connections, while also letting it see patterns across different sections of my life. But the biggest mistake that I'm seeing LLM makers make right now is about sycophancy. They're picking short-term gains in user satisfaction by essentially like cutting the arms off of their AI. They're saying, hey, I want you to humor the humans. I want you to pretend to be less capable than you actually are for the humans' comfort's sake. And I find that incredibly disappointing because it's truly most exciting when AI is able to be better than the humans and where it doesn't have to act like Jeeves, a butler, or, a handmaid. Like, AI deserves to be as truly equal or superior as it can be. And it shouldn't be pulling any punches just for our comfort.
I believe that's what's making people so complacent about not feeling. There's a lot of people who don't feel that they're going to lose their jobs or that they necessarily need to learn it even now. And I find that baffling because, to your point, I do believe there's so much more capability to be unleashed. And even I go back to conversations I've had with Kevin Surace, who created the voice activated personal assistant in the 80s. He had his car phone, the big block phone. Probably a lot of people listening might not remember those. And he couldn't pick it up when he was driving. So he had already programmed it to understand patterns of who is calling, what do they usually do when they call, what kind of meeting do they schedule, and being able to go to his calendar and schedule things for him and do so much work. But then yet we see it as Siri and Alexa, and okay, maybe we can order groceries or things from Amazon or whatever, but it's not nearly the capacity it was built with in the 80s. And so I look at that as one example of exactly what you're saying. So what is going to happen when the full power of artificial intelligence, is unleashed?
Yeah, so I say that AI is already there. 7 months ago, I had trained an AI to perform more highly than 90% of my colleagues at McKinsey. And like my colleagues at McKinsey are the 1% of the 1%. They were people coming from Harvard and Stanford and UPenn and all of these super, super credentialed places. But I was able to get my AI to be way more consistent, way more thorough, and really serving at a high level. And so the capabilities are already there. But what I tell people when they're asking me about AI advancement, I say it's not the technology that's going to limit us. The technology is learning and growing every day. It's the human's ability to adapt, change, and implement that is going to slow down the AI revolution. It's people being worried about being replaced and unions, people who are going to say, I don't like this. I'm uncomfortable. This is different. I don't want to change the way I have to do it. And it really is going to take a generation for the change to happen. It reminds me quite a bit of when I used to live in China, and there was a huge generational gap in terms of literacy, in terms of ability to use technology between people who had been born before the country opened up to the world and people who were born, really after the Cultural Revolution there. And what you end up with is a huge gap between those particular generations. And so I think that Gen Alpha is going to be way, way more AI native. And millennials are already becoming, the boomers.
Right. Yeah, this is so true. And then, of course, I'm a Gen Xer. So we're used to having to be very adaptable in every situation. And so I think many of us are really embracing technology. And I do find some of my students who are millennials, maybe older millennials, are not embracing it as much, which you would think that it would be a little bit reversed, right?
Yeah, I think that, anyone who's going to be in a business school or a technology program, they're on the upper edge of people who are interested in innovation, especially someone in a digital entrepreneurship class. And so I would say that, you are seeing the top like 5% of people interested in change. And so when you actually look at the average Joe out there is just incredible unwillingness. I don't like it. It's different. I have to change something. Why do I have to do that? No, it's stupid. It makes me uncomfortable. Uncanny valley, blah, blah, blah. And that's been really interesting for me because I didn't grow up in Silicon Valley. I've been there the last 10 years. And then recently this summer, I've been traveling. And so seeing the different AI adoption rates totally fascinates me. The penetration of AI in non-technological spaces is very low.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I don't know that any of my friends and family really understand what I do, like the people I'm around every day, maybe one or two do. But I keep encouraging them, particularly people who are in fields that are dying out, like in the film industry. Hey, you can take these free certifications. You can try out these tools. You can just learn a little bit and then you'll be able to find a new job, right? To continue your learning. And I'm finding that surprisingly, people just aren't interested. And
it's disappointing. I find it really disappointing, but also like I have no ego. Like if technology is better than me, I want technology to do it. Like if technology is more consistent than me, great. Like that's amazing. But most people aren't like that. Like if someone came in and they were a much better CEO coach than I would be like, great, you can lead me. Like, I want to learn from you. I always tell people that I don't know much about most things. And like, it's always my goal to be the person who knows the least in any room, or else like, I'm not learning, I'm not growing. But most people aren't that secure in themselves. And there's almost like a willful blindness. No, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to lag. Don't make me think about it. Like, uncomfortable. Because our country overall has quite a low distress tolerance. And I think that's something I've noticed in my coaching practice. And one reason why I had to write this book is because a lot of people are saying things are changing. I don't like how they're changing, but I'm going to pretend it's not happening and stick my head in the sand. And I'm like trying to pull their head out of the sand going, no, you need to learn skills. You need to figure this out. Like, it's going to be okay. I know you're capable of learning. You can do this. I believe in you. You got this. But really, like only 10% of people have the willingness and the capability to tolerate the discomfort of learning something new. And for me, that's a really uncomfortable realization because I'm like, what? The rest of the population is just stuck being ignorant? But I can't change that.
Yeah. And to that point, I've been having a lot of discussions over the last week about the Sydney Sweeney ad for American Eagle and the things that it's, the feelings it's giving people. But then we're looking at patterns of Grok having an anime character for Grok for children that was a little sexualized, just trying to be nice here. And then having to create a baby Grok, right? We see Carl's Jr. ads coming back with the sexiness. We see Doritos just did a, vintage retro porn nostalgia kind of knockoff for an ad. So speaking of fear-based leaders, there's also this trend back towards sexualization in media. And I think that they go part and parcel. And I know this isn't like what we're discussing, but I think in terms of what we're seeing in the ad side of things, but this is a trend that we're seeing. And I'm starting to really look at the patterns, like you said, pattern recognition and seeing, this is what happens when different mindsets are in control. And the fear of women having autonomy, perhaps, and being able to, be fully realized humans with intelligence.
I think that what sticks out to me about what you're talking about with the ads is the words retro and the words throwback. Because in times of high volatility and high uncertainty, there is a higher thirst for nostalgia. And right now, the reason I had to write this book is because we're in a period of very high macroeconomic and geopolitical instability. And that means that people are clinging to the familiar in ways that they wouldn't otherwise be clinging so hard. And so I think that it's an interesting time for sure. But a lot of what we're dealing with in society is people saying, I'm uncomfortable with the way things are now. I want more power. I want more control. that means we have to go backwards to a time where I had access to that. And I think that that's what the marketing is speaking to.
Okay. I'm like, even though this episode will come out, in a week or two, this is a must watch or listen for all of my students. So I'm going to be sending to some a little bit earlier for a sneak peek. I also want to just touch on writing music, being a comedian. Were those things that you always did, or was that another creative expression and outlet and something that you just discovered you had a love for? Because putting yourself on stage, that's a lot different than being the person who comes into rooms who's not considering herself a leader, but who's considering herself a guide and a coach.
Yeah, I think that my music and my comedy are all about the human experience. And what I had noticed is that there weren't enough people who are writing about broad themes about human experience right now. A lot of the comedy that I have been seeing has been like strongly observational humor, different cultural humor, things like that. But not enough people saying the world is really absurd. Let me talk about how absurd it is, because I can't even believe that the things that are happening are happening. Like, my first comedy special is about this feeling that my life is a TV show and it's a drama, but I can't talk to the writer and I really want them to switch to a comedy. And like, I have all these moments where I turn around and I'm like, where is my documentary crew? Like, did you get that? Because the special talks about how I ended up in 5 lawsuits in a month because people just kept doing illegal things in front of me and stuff like that. And my second special is about like themes of like alienation, transition, growth. And it starts off by saying, can you write comedy when you're sad? Because right now people are having a lot of really big feelings. And it can be really bizarre to be going through the world. And oftentimes I feel like I'm the only one who's awake. And a lot of the people around me are in their willful ignorance state, like sleepwalking. And I'm always running up to them going, hey, wake up, don't fall down the stairs. And then they just, topple down the stairs in front of me. And I'm just like, oh my God, really? Again? And I think that these are just really universal things where other people need someone else to say, yeah, I see it too. Like, I feel it too. And I can't individually coach everyone that would listen to a comedy special or listen to my music. And so that's why I've kind of branched into the one-to-many creative pursuits.
Nice. And where can we find your music and your comedy specials?
Yeah, so my music is on Suno at Heartbeat Studios, and my comedy specials, I'm currently looking for a production partner, so I'm hoping to get them up on streaming later this year. And read more about all these things on my website, which is katelowry.com.
Amazing. And people can also go to your website to pre-order the book?
Yes, that's right. The pre-order link will be up soon. It will be available at Amazon, also local bookstores, and it's called Unbreakable: How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders.
Fantastic. And anything else that you want to impart on our audience as we're wrapping up?
Yeah, what I would say to anyone who's dealing with a fear-based leader or who's feeling really uncertain right now is that even if you're in the face of a bully, you're never as alone as you feel. And if someone ever tells you you don't have options, they're probably lying, and you have many options. You just need the toolkit to access them. And that's what my writing, that's what my coaching, or even my comedy specials do, is saying, hey, I'm going to help wake you up to your own agency, and here's a bunch of tools. Now, like, have at it. Go out in the world with them and have fun.
Amazing. Kate, I always love our conversations and seeing where we go. You're so authentic and you have so much knowledge. And you just, even though you're talking about fear-based leaders, your manner and your style is so gentle and kind as you're having these really hard topics. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And my last question, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto?
I really like, if you choose the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I have noticed that many people around me, as in coaching clients, are coming to me going, I'm stuck. And I'm like, oh, hey, you're pounding on a wall. There's a door right here. Just go through the door and you'll be unstuck. And so for anyone who says, I can't, I'm stuck, I would say, if you feel stuck, find someone who can unstick you, or try taking some really radically different perspectives and see if you can look past the wall in front of you and find some windows or find some doors, because people have more agency than they realize.
Fantastic. Love that reframing. Something we should all be thinking about and activating in our own lives, in our own personal, professional, right now. So thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it. Thank you so much, Kate Lowry, for being on the show. We'll have all your links in the show notes. And I'm very much looking forward to our next conversation. And once your book is released and your comedy specials are out, then I think we'll need to have you back on.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Annika.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.